So is Russia engaged in an evil plot to kidnap American citizens so that they can use them for prisoner swaps like the liberal media says? No. The idea is completely ridiculous, and the recent prisoner swap between Victor Bout and Brittney Griner is a perfect example of what happens when athletes are in a culture where they're above the law, go to a country where rules are actually enforced. For starters, Brittney Griner broke the law. She was taking marijuana into Russia through a border crossing. Now, we all know if we go to Canada and buy a bunch of weed and try to cross the US border, we're going to be in trouble. 10 years in a prison colony is not the kind of trouble we would be in, but either way, we would enforce that law on our border as well. The idea that thousands of American tourists go to Russia every year and they don't all end up in jail kind of shows that this is not part of some sinister Russian plot, and is just, I think it further illustrates how much the liberals and the Democratic Party and the left hates Russia and conspire against them continuously, and I think it's frustrating. Russia has certainly contributed to that recently, so it's not like they're angels, but I think we have to recognize the media bias in terms of cases like this, because there is a widespread left-wing conspiracy against Russia long before this war took place. Paul Whelan is an American military veteran who was not dishonorably discharged. He got a bad conduct discharge, which is just a step away from dishonorable, but there is a difference. So Whelan had been discharged from the Marine Corps for was involved in some kind of a scheme where he tried to steal like $10,000 or something. I couldn't get the details of it, but it seemed pretty shady, but the Marine Corps gave him a bad conduct discharge and he was not allowed to re-enlist. There's also discrepancies between his statements of being a police officer between this year, and then those police departments saying that he never worked for them. so the whole thing looks a little suspicious, but on top of Whelan obviously being somewhat of a suspicious character, if that's not an understatement, it's clear that when he decided to take an active interest in the Russian country and started learning the language and started communicating with people on the Russian social media platform called VKontakte. VK.com, it's like Facebook, only way better, by the way. You can listen to music and it's cool. I'm on there too, but anyway. So he goes on the VKontakte, he goes on the VK and starts actively searching for Russian military officers to be friends with, and then flies over to the country and hangs out with Russian military officers. Then he brags about making friends with FSB officers on top of this. And so the FSB had said in a BBC article that they've been watching him for quite some time, and they found this activity of his to be quite suspicious. Now, this obviously doesn't lead to us assuming that he was guilty of espionage. At the time he was arrested, he had come into town allegedly for a wedding, right? But he arrives at the airport with $80,000 in US cash. Kind of suspicious, I think, but it is probably, I'm pretty sure you're legally allowed to carry cash around the world, so we can't indict him for that. They confiscate the $80,000 in cash, but they continue to watch him while he's in there for this alleged wedding. Then at the time of the wedding, when he was supposed to be there, he suddenly disappeared to go back to his hotel room to allegedly meet with someone. And this is the time that the FSB takes him and arrests him, and then they find a USB drive with the names of Russian spies on it. And so, I don't know, did he get the knock list like in the first Mission Impossible movie? I don't know. Either way, all the conduct around this guy is very suspicious. So I can imagine the president taking a look at this when Trump had the opportunity to make this trade for Whelan and Bout. Trump looked at the records like, hey, this guy's really dangerous. This guy's really kind of shady. I don't think this is worth the transfer, and that's what he said at the time. Now, Victor Bout is an interesting character all on his own. Some have said that he was the guy that was inspired by the movie Lord of War. I don't think that's true, because I think there's an American contractor that was based on. But anyway, but the movie does remind you of the shady world of arms sales as they take place around the world. Bout was notoriously known for selling arms to America's enemies and groups that our intelligence agencies have called state sponsors of terror. I've got a list here of the countries countries he sold weapons to. So he sold weapons to the Taliban in Afghanistan, other UN-sanctioned nations like Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Liberia, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Sudan, and Bosnian Muslims back in the 90s during that conflict. Bout was wanted by Interpol, and they've been trying to capture him for quite a while. They managed to find Bout in 2008 when U.S. agents from the DEA arranged to buy weapons pretending to be FARC, a Colombian separatist for FARC. Now, FARC is a hangover from the communist era, who were part of Comintern back in the 1940s, Communist International. And they began working officially in 1964 in Colombia, creating to fight for the rights of workers and so on that Democrats in America would really like. But he was selling weapons to FARC, and FARC is actually an interesting organization in itself. FARC is responsible for 60% of the cocaine that is brought into the United States. They are responsible for kidnapping and holding people ransom. You've got drugs, money laundering, a whole laundry list of things that they've gone on to do, despite having started off originally as this peasant rebellion in Colombia. Hence why they're on this list and why they seem like a good group for the DEA to pretend to be to buy weapons off someone like him. But it gets even more interesting when he had actually promised to sell these agents. Let me read this list. Unbelievable. So they were going to buy 800 surface-to-air missiles, 30,000 AK-47s, 10 million rounds of ammunition, 5 tons of C4, ultralight airplanes with grenade launchers on them. The list is a little longer, but the point is, this was enough weapons for a small army about anywhere in the world, and probably more than the weapon sales that are made to most incredibly large nations. So the DEA got this guy before he made this alleged sale to FARC, but you have to wonder where he would have gotten all this stuff from. And how could he have gotten it there? Allegedly, he said that they were going to use strategic airdrops to deliver all the supplies to the Colombians in the middle of the jungle somewhere. So first, I'm in the wrong business. Wow, how do you do that? And so as you can see from this list and what's happening, Interpol and several countries wanted this guy, so when there's an opportunity to entrap him into coming to a meeting in Thailand, they grabbed him and they brought him to the US and they tried him. He was found guilty of illegal arms sales and sentenced to 25 years in prison, 11 years of which he served before being involved in this prisoner swap. On the campaign trail, more facts about Whelan could come out, and I don't think you want to be on the wrong side of this issue. It's important to exercise caution in framing Biden and the Democrats as once again choosing to check boxes for their social wokeness and while waging war on the white man. Although that's typically the trope and that's typically true. You know how anti-white the Democrats are. They're very racist. They hate you. Okay, and I'm a traitor. So yeah, I say that with a grain of salt, but the Whelan case does look very suspicious. And if Russia, and as you know, the Democrats, they hate Russia. They hate Russia. Before the situation with Ukraine, the Democrats and the left hated Russia. They hated them. It's almost irrational why they hated them. And the behavior of Hillary Clinton while she was Secretary of State, denouncing them and suggesting regime change and doing some other things while she was Secretary of State only exacerbated this. NATO enlargement and other things that have happened over the last 30 years have created a snowball effect of wild conspiracy and such involving Russians, as well as the Democrats blaming Russia for Donald Trump getting elected because they didn't want to admit publicly that their candidate for president was just not liked. So at the same time that all this is happening with Russia and it being incredibly controversial, this is not a time to jump to too many conclusions, because if Trump didn't want to do a trade for this guy, I think there's something to that, and I think he was looking at a situation that was a little different. I can't help but to wonder how many other Americans have been put in jail who have also broken the law and are in Russian jails and don't get to come home because they're not black, lesbian, and famous. I think that's really frustrating to read when the State Department continues to say that this is happening to Americans being put in jail for minor crime. Griner had been working in Russia playing basketball there for several years. She knew the laws. I think it's a very frightening scenario when our president will go through and save somebody famous while leaving regular Americans like us behind. And this would have been an opportunity perhaps to have a conversation about these other Americans who may be in prison over there. And not all of them are as suspicious looking necessarily as Whelan is. I also think that the Democrats' hatred for Russia helped to contribute to creating some hostilities between our nations, because Brittney Griner did commit a crime. She was guilty of bringing drugs across the border. And had that happened at the Canadian border, she may not have gone to jail, because she's famous and plays basketball and has a lot of money. What about all the other people who make mistakes like that at our border? Where do they end up? They're in jail. So if our administration is not going to release all those people, why should we expect the Russians to release theirs? The hypocrisy is ridiculous. This also teaches an important lesson that even though she did commit a crime, we acted like Russia was the bad guy. I mean, Americans just can't go around the world committing crimes. This is ridiculous. You have to treat other nations with the same courtesy and respect we expect foreigners to have for our country when they come here. The idea of trying to sneak drugs into Russia is abhorrent, just like it would be abhorrent to try to sneak drugs into any other country. When we're Americans and we travel, we need to be good people. We need to be good guests. And having been to several countries around the world, I do my best not to do anything so ridiculous as to break their laws. This also shows the double standards for our athletes. The fact is, athletes here are above the law. If you're rich and you have money, you can do whatever you want, while regular Americans are held to a different standard. Brittney Griner is a symbol of everything that's wrong with America. The fact that she can commit such a crime in a foreign country and the president advocates for her, but if I got beat up jaywalking, the president wouldn't say a damn thing about it. He just wouldn't, because I'm not famous or gay or liberal or rich like all his friends. You and I continue to get left behind by the left in this country, and oftentimes by the right. And this is just another symbol of that. So, on the campaign trail, I hope you remind the voters that there are two Americas. Those for the rich and the powerful and the liberal who check the right box, who are the right gender or not gender, who have the right amount of money, who get to do whatever they want. And then there's the rest of us. Those of us who have to obey the law. Those of us who don't get a free pass out of jail if we commit a serious crime in a foreign country. You and I are held to a different standard than Joe Biden, the left, and all their friends.